Gavin Newsom's not running this year. He's got 2 years left on his term as California Lieutenant Governor, but he's hardly sitting out these elections. In fact, he's campaigning hard for ballot measures that would tighten gun control laws and legalize marijuana. Oh, and he will be running in 2018 for governor. So why does he think he's the person for the job? And what's he doing about the state's many problems? He's here to tell us right now on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Memorial Care is transforming the way healthcare is delivered, keeping our communities and businesses healthy by guiding them on the path to wellness with easily accessible hospitals, physician offices, and outpatient centers. Memorial Care, leading the way.
I think we get too caught up in the celebrity and the enthusiasm of the moment.
Yeah. Well, hi, I'm Rick Reef. Welcome to Inside OC, and I'm talking with the former mayor of San Francisco and the state's lieutenant governor, Gavin Newsom.
Morning.
And as you can tell, you have a very supportive audience.
Well,
here
when you bring
too.
your whole staff, they better be.
So I know you've been going around the state and you're really stumping for a couple of ballot measures. And before we get into those, though, you're here in Southern California. You're a Bay Area guy. Tell us a little bit about Gavin Newsom.
Well, yeah, I grew up in San Francisco, fifth generation San Franciscan. Life steeped into politics, cause of contribution, public service. I grew up idolizing Bobby Kennedy. Idolizing Sarge Shriver. In fact, I've grown more and more passionate about what Sarge Shriver represents.
Your dad was involved in politics.
My dad was a judge on the Superior Court of Appeals. Had a life as an activist. I was very involved in environmental causes. So my entire life was, the sense of responsibility that I had agency, that you've got a voice, you've got to share it, you got to step in, you got to step up. And there was a sense, I think the elliptical language of the 60s, a sense of idealism that came out of the 60s, I sort of inherited a little bit of that from my father, this notion of standing up for ideals, striking out against injustice, and an entrepreneurial energy that I got from my mother, a single mom. Dad and mom were divorced after just 2 years. She raised me and my sister. We were a foster family growing up. And she struggled, but she had grit and perseverance, and there was a toughness to her, and that brought me into a life of entrepreneurialism. And right now I'm proud to have 23 small businesses. I employ close to 1,000 people in the state. So it's the combination
of what kind of business?
Restaurants, hotels, wineries, retail outlets. And so I have this deep sense of entrepreneurialism, which is about solving problems, not managing problems, and a deep sense of idealism about solving, in the language of the 60s, ignorance and poverty and disease. And I think it marks a little bit of my politics, and it marks a little bit of differentiation, candidly, of my politics from sort of the orthodoxies and the ideologies that are more traditional.
Yeah, you don't really
fit
in the boxes too easily. I mean, there's things about you that Newt Gingrich likes, for example. And so are you libertarian? Are you liberal? I mean, what's
fiscally conservative? Look, my passion is jobs in the economy. It's the work I do as chair of the Economic Development Commission. It's been the cause of my life, again, as a business person that's tried to bring that into the life of politics. I've been very critical, frankly, of some members of my party. I think the language of our party is a little bit of anti-business, and with respect, you can't be pro-job and anti-business, and I think we need to be cautious about that.
Your party is the Democratic
Party. At the same time, businesses can't thrive in a world that's failing. And so I think the business community needs to recognize that it's about growth and inclusion. And it's that and inclusion, particularly in California, where we have a bifurcated economy, a hybrid economy, the richest and the poorest state simultaneously, and that we must mind that gap. To me, outside of the issue of climate change, the issue of income inequality, the lack of social mobility is the issue of our time, and it must be addressed.
What do you say to those who argue California is really failing on that we are becoming a polarized state, as you say, between rich and poor? There's north and south, there's inland and the coast. People concerned that we're following policies, many of them emanating from your Bay Area, that are driving the middle class and the working class out of California. First of all, do you accept that argument, and what do you think of it?
Well, we've got an estimate. I think it's a low estimate: 115,000 homeless out on the streets, sidewalks in the state, more than any other state in the nation. I think it's close to 150, 160,000. You've got 25% when you adjust for cost of living, people living in poverty in the state of California. You've got folks in Colusa County and Imperial right now, 23.8% in non-seasonally adjusted August unemployment. That certainly would attest to your frame, which is, we're not performing at capacity. We're not meeting our obligations. And so, yes, no, we're failing in too many areas, and we've got to address that.
So let's talk about climate change. California's been out front, leading the world on climate change. The governor just signed some climate change legislation. It's being hailed by conservationists, by environmentalists. A lot of people say this is just going to drive more business out of California. Did you support that legislation?
I'm passionate about radically changing the way we produce and consume energy. I'm very passionate about the work the governor's done in the legislature.
But won't that
raising
cost
the bar.
the kind of jobs you're talking
about? I think creates many more jobs, and I think will be lost. Look, I want to lean into the future. This is the future, low carbon, green growth strategies. I think there's three things that are going to define the next decade in debate in this state and this country: the issues of debt and entitlement, energy and climate change, and the issue of the merger of IT and globalization detonating at the same time. California is leading in its low carbon green growth strategies. California is a model for the rest of the nation and for the rest of the world. I want to maintain that status. When I was mayor of San Francisco, there was no city in the country that was more aggressive in low carbon green growth strategies. And right now there's few cities in America doing as well as San Francisco. And incidentally, despite my negativity about some of the areas where we're not performing in California, since 2010, no state's created more jobs than California. Our unemployment's gone from 12.4% now to 5.6%, again, non-seasonally adjusted. We're making great progress despite the dystopian vision that some had laid on the footsteps and the door of Governor Brown and others, that our policies would drive jobs when in fact we're creating jobs at the moment.
But I think, as you know, that job creation is taking place largely in San Francisco and the Bay Area. That is part of California. I mean, that means something. But if you take that again to the polarization, if you take the jobs being created in the Bay Area out of the equation, the rest of California is not doing that well.
I mean, it's pockets. Look, I put together an economic development strategy. We call it Regions Rising Together, and we basically look at the state from 14 distinctive regions. And I think the challenge with California's economic development plans is we don't really have any. There's no intentionality as it relates to jobs in the economy. We got to step up our game. And this is where, frankly, the governor and I, we had some early friction. I am someone that believes that you've got to be aggressive. I think we're living in a competitive environment, not just with other governors casing our joint, coming on hunting trips, hunting for jobs in California, but with a backdrop of a global economy. We're the 6th largest economy in the world. And what we do has to be considered in that context. And so California has, look, we have a balance sheet like no other. We have more scientists, more researchers, more engineers, more Nobel laureates, the finest system of higher education anywhere on the planet. We should be the envy of the rest of the nation. But there are areas where there are gaps, and I absolutely agree with that. But one of the areas where I'm not going to pull back, or at least I'm not going to assert we should pull back, is low carbon green growth's future. Because at the end of the day, this nation and the world needs to change the way it produces and consumes energy. And I think that's a net job gain, net job benefit. And I would hate to retreat from that future. I want to lean into it.
We've both invoked the governor's name here in our conversation, and you politically, it looks sometimes like a love-hate thing, and I'm going to ask you about that. But first of all, you have a very personal connection with Jerry Brown.
Yeah, it goes back generations. My grandfather ran Pat Brown's first campaign, was one of his closest friends, Kathleen Brown's godfather. Pat ran for district attorney in San Francisco. My grandfather was his campaign manager and one of his closest friends and allies.
So your family?
Long-term family, and my dad and Jerry are very close, and I'm very close with Jerry. But it's a challenge when you know someone your entire life, and you become his lieutenant governor, is familiarity. And so it was interesting. Again, we get along extraordinarily well, and I think he's done an exceptional job. I don't think he's done a good job. I think he's done an exceptional job, taking us from where we were 6 years ago to where we are today. All those things that were outstanding are long-term trends in this state. But what Governor Brown has done to prove this, that you don't have to be profligate to be progressive, is profoundly important, and he has been the adult in the room. And while we haven't gone as far on debt and entitlement as we must, he has made progress. While we haven't gone as far on the issues, of course, poverty alleviation and eradication, we have done things that substantially mitigate that. And had we not done those things, I think those statistics would be even worse.
I guess one big thing where you disagree is the bullet train. Right?
We don't disagree. I was its
well,
first.
He's for it.
I was its first champion. In fact, I was one of the co-chairs of the campaign, the original $9.95 billion bond. And we, in fact, in San Francisco, celebrated the fact we had the northern terminus for the high-speed rail. We call it the Grand Central Station on the west coast of the United States. But what I was promoting was a $33 billion bond, of which 1/3 of the money has come from the state, 1/3 from the feds, 1/3 for the private sector. What's happened clearly is we're not seeing any private sector money. The federal dollars are only a little over $3 billion, and this cost has more than doubled, and ridership has substantially been decreased, and the expectation of a surplus has disappeared. So my concern, I've expressed, is on the financing of it.
So are you saying you're not against? You're not
never been
against
against it. I'm just legitimate. I've been asking tough questions, and apparently, when you ask tough questions publicly, then you're considered an opponent, and so folks have framed it. But I'm not an opponent. I'm just legitimately concerned that we can deliver on the promise that we have been promoting for the last 6 or 7 years.
Well, at this point, it does look like it's $80 billion or whatever.
Yeah, well, we're in the mid-60s. We value an engineer from the high 90s.
Given that, you're saying go ahead.
Concerns. The governors try to be creative by using cap and trade money, a quarter of it. Now the cap and trade program needs to be extended. If it is extended, the goal is, from his perspective, that he could bond against those dollars, which would create some more security from the private sector. They'd come in. I want to give him the benefit of that doubt, but I'm concerned about the ability to deliver on that. And so, again, my critique should not be used as opposition. That said, I think you have to be honest with folks. And as someone who promoted the high-speed rail probably disproportionately as the first mayor to come out and support it, I also need to be accountable for delivering it on time and on budget. And right now, it's not on time, and it sure as heck isn't on budget. So we need to be fiscal stewards of this, and that's really where I am on it.
So I'm still a little confused about that.
I want to make it work, but we got to make it work by making sure it pencils out.
Okay.
Right now, I have legitimate concerns about how it pencils out.
Let's talk about governor, because you've made I think you're the first one officially out there saying you want to be governor. You've got a campaign. There's a few other names that have come up, some prominent Democrats, 5 or 6, I think, that are speculation. Also one, your buddy Willie Brown, the former Assembly Speaker, wrote a column saying
what did
that,
he say?
Well, and
Willie's columns.
It hasn't been confirmed, but he said George Clooney is thinking of running now. Now, I want to ask you.
I know George. He's not running.
And what could he be thinking? He would be running against the only man in California who's better looking than he is.
All right. We lost 99% of the audience on that. So
no, George. When we mentioned Clooney,
they're still watching. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I don't expect George is going to run, but that said, there are going to be a lot of folks running, and that's a good thing. I think people want choice, and that's healthy, and they should get a lot of choice. I mean, this is the most extraordinary state on the planet, and you're going to have a lot of folks that are going to actively engage and actively participate in this process, and they'll be announcing themselves very, very soon. I imagine right after the election, you'll have 3 or 4 people formally announcing their candidacy.
In a way, I brought up Clooney because I wanted to ask you about the whole Kennedy-esque mystique that you have. People refer to it all the time. You're photogenic, articulate, youthful, and all that kind of thing. Do you embrace that, or is that annoying?
No, I don't. I don't even know how to respond to any of that. God bless. No, I used to be young. I'm no longer. To the extent I'm articulate depends on the time of day. To the extent I'm curious, if curiosity is intellect, then I'll accept that as a compliment. But look, everybody has a unique experience in life. Everyone, offers a worldview that is distinctive based upon their experiences. And as a 2-term mayor of San Francisco, someone served as a county member of the Board of Supervisors, president of the Parking and Traffic Commission. Now my 2nd term as lieutenant governor, someone with deep private sector experience, someone who's passionate about this state and the world we're living in more broadly. I think I offer a perspective, and I hope that perspective meets the moment. But again, politics is all about meeting the moment. And in a year and a half, 2 years from now, we don't really have a great sense of where we'll be, but I have a sense where California should be. And I think one of the things that Governor Brown has done exceptionally well is he's had a plan for triage, a plan for solvency, and he's delivered on it. But what we need now is a grand strategy, a plan for greatness that can tie this state together, north and south, east and west, to mind that gap we talked about in terms of this gap between the rich and the poor, and address what Alan Kruger refers to as the Great Gatsby curve, which again is the issue of our time. And that's what I'm doing. That's why I started early. I think it's better to be candid than coy about your intentions. Nothing's worse than a politician who you know is planning something but won't acknowledge it. And so I said, yeah, I have interest in running for governor. Better or for worse, I'm going to put myself out there now. And that's not about raising money. It's about raising a framework to engage in a policy conversation with folks for 2 or 3 years so I can answer the how question when I offer myself up in the ballot in 2018.
Okay. I don't know how much it addresses the issue of California greatness, but we have a lot of ballot measures. We've got 17 of them, a voter's guide that's over 200 pages, and
yeah,
you've got a lot. You're involved in a lot of that. Yeah. There's
and maybe
two of
the
them.
plastic bag ban referendum, since I did the first plastic bag ban as mayor. So maybe I'm slightly responsible.
So you are, and we're going to talk in a moment, Prop 63, the gun control one, which you are actually, your name is on the argument for that. And 64, legalization of marijuana, you're not in the argument, but it's basically, you're the architect of that.
I spent 3 years putting it together. Look, I mean, for me, that's a social justice issue. It's a criminal justice reform issue. It's about economic justice, racial justice. For me, it's a righteous cause. I am not pro-marijuana. I'm not pro-cannabis. I'm anti-prohibition. And I think a lot of people find themselves in that position. I think we can do a lot better than this war on drugs. And I think if California goes, it will be a punctuation point, and it will pierce the war on drugs to a degree that it will have an impact all across not just this nation, but down south of the border. It's going to change our relationships to Mexico and Latin America. So I know we'll talk more about that, but I'm very intense about succeeding here and making sure that people recognize this. Legalization is not an event that's going to occur on Election Day. It's a process that's going to unfold over the course of many, many years. You cannot be ideological about it. You've got to be open to argument, interested in evidence. On the issue of gun safety, California has led the nation since 1993. Since 1993 to 2013, we've seen a 56% decline in gun murder rate. In 1993, we had 5,322 people gunned down. It was one of the 15th highest. It was 15%, higher than the national average. We have seen a 56% decline in that gun murder rate because of our gun safety laws. California's gun safety laws are working, but they're gaps. And our Safety for All initiative addresses those gaps. And the most significant opportunity is to address this, briefly, final issue as it relates to gun safety. And that is, we are debating about background checks for guns, but guns, as important as that is, a gun has never killed anybody unless used as a blunt instrument. It's just curious to me we're not debating background checks on ammunition. You can't get Sudafed without using your ID, but you can buy unlimited rounds of ammunition anywhere in California because there's no licensing requirements. I believe we should treat ammunition the same way we do guns. And if we pass Prop 63, California will be the first state in the nation to do that. I think it's a game changer in the gun safety debate, and it will save lives.
So the question then is, why isn't law enforcement on board with this? They're either very cool toward it or outright opposed. And let me just read, which I think is kind of the nub of the opposition to this. Signed by the president of the California State Sheriff's Association and the Reserve Peace Officers Association. Prop 63 would divert scarce law enforcement resources from local law enforcement, overburdened and overcrowded court system, and with laws that will turn harmless law-abiding citizens into criminals. Yeah. In fact, New York recently abandoned its enforcement of a similar proposal, finding it was impossible to implement and to maintain. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what the big arguments are.
I'm sure this author was making arguments against every one of our gun safety measures going back 20 years. I mean, it's just, it's golden oldie, it's stale rhetoric. With all due respect, I don't know what they're referring to. What law, background checks on guns, which they opposed originally. Background checks on ammo is the same process protocol. I don't know how it's a diversion of
Well,
resources.
now people are, when you sell ammo, if you're a dealer, you've got to file, you got to fill out a form or something.
But I don't know how
it's
I don't know how it's a diversion of resources for law enforcement. I don't know how if your gun's lost
well,
or
someone's
stolen.
got to check. I guess what they're saying is, is people have to go in and check the books.
$229 billion is the money we spent on gun violence last year. $583,000 every time someone ends up in your hospital. You're a taxpayer, we're paying for that. I don't want to spend the money. I want to save lives. They opposed it before they even saw the initiative. I don't think this, I know it. We actually amended our initiative. When I got that letter of opposition, we actually added in something law enforcement wanted, which was a fix on Prop 47 as it relates to felony versus misdemeanor status of a possession of a legal firearm worth $950 or less. Confusing, but an important thing for law enforcement that's in our initiative. Other provisions are if your gun's lost and stolen, we think you should report it to law enforcement. By the way, the National Police Chiefs Association supported that for decades. 11 other states do it. We'd be the 12th state. Requiring background checks on ammo is not a diversion of resources.
All right, so then why
I don't know what the it's
but
just
then
knee
why?
jerk. But they are opposed all the time. I mean, just that they oppose.
So law enforcement
is
just
consistently opposed to a lot of our gun safety measures, but it's not law enforcement writ large. We have tons of law enforcement endorsing our initiative. It's the sheriffs primarily. And the sheriffs are opposed. The sheriff associations, the principal opposition in Nevada's background checks for guns. I mean, they just oppose any kind of common sense. With all due respect, I have a different worldview. I respect the work they do. Gun background checks have not been a massive diversion of resources. 12 people every day are rejected in California that shouldn't be buying guns, and I think that's a good thing. I would like to think we can extend it to ammo and save lives. I don't think they should be as concerned as they are.
Okay.
And by the way, I think the public has had it, and the public's overwhelmingly supportive of these gun safety measures.
It appears the public is overwhelmingly supportive of both measures, 63 and 64.
Which is a good sign, even though both issues are issues that most politicians don't want to touch. Sadly, I'm the only statewide official that supports the end of prohibition of marijuana. And on gun safety, people don't want to take on the NRA. I'm happy to take them on. I think they are bankrupt in many respects. I'm sick and tired of the gun lobby dominating our political discourse. California, it's interesting, they always point to Chicago, but they never talk about California's gun laws because they've worked at scale and they've saved lives. We're going to save lives with safety for all, and we're going to prove to the sheriffs that it wasn't some mass conspiracy to take guns or the end of the Second Amendment. I support the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, and know a lot of good people that own guns. I respect that, but common sense is a little bit of background checks to keep out of hands of people that are dangerously mentally ill, people that are dangerous felons. I think that's something that people are going to support, and I think it's a healthy thing.
Yeah. You mentioned a little earlier in praising Governor Brown that he's taken important steps, but not enough on pension reform. And let's talk about that, because that's a big issue that it seems the state, politicians throughout the state have ignored. As the unfunded liability now for public employee pensions, $250 billion. Eventually, that means less money for everything else, will affect the state's ability to borrow. I mean, it's kind of things hard for citizens to wrap their hands around. Is it a huge problem, and what would you do about it?
Well, it's a big problem, and look, I applaud the governor. He's attempted. It's not for lack of effort, but the results have not gone as far as he had hoped for. Yeah. And so what he's doing now is, rather than one solution, one legislative solution, he's trying to piecemeal contract by contract and leaning into this. You've got two unfunded liabilities. You have your pension and unfunded health care liability. If you have a discussion about the budget in California and you're not talking about health costs, then you're not having a conversation about the budget. There's three areas of the budget that are devouring the budget. It's pension and retirement benefits, it's health-related costs, and continued corrections costs that continue to increase in the state. Those are the outsized areas that we need to temper. I made a point when I was mayor of San Francisco when we did 2 rounds of pension reform. We did it with, not to, labor. We did it across the bargaining table. It's a different approach. Some people want to just take on and take cheap shots at labor. That's not my approach. It's the old African proverb. You want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together. And I think increasingly labor recognizes that this is a growing progressive issue. Why do I say progressive issue? To your point, it's crowding out the rest of the budget. And if we want to
We have
invest
30 seconds, by
If
the
we
way.
want to invest in preschool, you want to invest in prenatal care, you want to invest in child care, you don't have that discretionary budget if more and more of that budget is being devoured by unfunded liabilities. And so we've got to address it. And I compliment the governor, but clearly that's not an issue going away.
And if you achieve your dream and become governor of California, I suspect that will be a big issue that you will have to
Big issue,
deal
but the
with.
number one issue, 2, 3, economic development, workforce development. On-demand economy requires on-demand education. We didn't get into education, but we have to reimagine a 21st century education system. All of these things are linked.
And we will be doing some more questions post-show on YouTube, so folks maybe will be able to hear something about how you think about education, as well as our upcoming election. I'd like to get your thoughts on that, too. Well, that's it for now. Thanks again to my guest, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom. And you can watch, and you can watch this show and past shows by going to pbssocal.org or rickreef.com. Also catch our shows and our post-show open mic chatter on YouTube. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Memorial Care is transforming the way healthcare is delivered, keeping our communities and businesses healthy by guiding them on the path to wellness with easily accessible hospitals, physician offices, and outpatient centers. Memorial Care, leading the way.